Welcome back, everyone. Today was day 2 of the Fischer Random World Chess Championship being held here in Reykjavik, Iceland. Now, as you guys know, I won my first 2 mini matches yesterday against Matthias Bluebaum from Germany and, of course, the reigning world champion Magnus Carlsen from Norway. Today, there were 2 more mini matches, but in a little bit of a twist, I was playing against the same opponent, Grandmaster Vladimir Fedoseev from Russia in both of them. Now, it has been a very long day, so I'm not going to be going over every single game that I played. So we're going to focus on the second game from each mini match. So in the first game of the first mini match, I drew with the white pieces, and we'll take a look at the second game. So the game starts with this move e4 here. Now, in between the first game and the second game, there's a lot of debate about various openings. For example, Magnus was saying that d4 f5 he felt was probably better for black. Oddly enough, computer thinks that white is much better, which shows that humans don't understand anything. And conversely, most of the players felt that f4 d5 was also probably better for black as well. f4 d5 would be good for white. So at the end of the day, you have this very strange situation where it depends who pushes which pawn. Additionally, another big topic of debate was, say white plays e4 and black plays d5, what is happening after takes bishop c4, rook d8, followed by knight to b6 and something along these lines. Or for example, say white plays a move like, let's just say white plays a move like knight to g3, e5, d4, takes, bishop c5, rook d3, followed by knight b3. Very, very unclear who should be better here when either white or black gets a bishop on c4, c5. At any rate, this did not happen in the game. The game starts with e4. I play pawn to e6, essaying the French defense, trying to take a bit of the center for myself. Vladimir plays f4. I play pawn to d5, and now he plays knight to g3. Perhaps not the best move. Computer actually thinks that after pawn takes, it wants to play something very weird like knight to g6, which I had not even thought about. I was simply going to take back with the pawn. And if white grabs the pawn on a7 here, after this move knight to b6, followed by rook to a8, black should have a lot of compensation for the sacrificed pawn and potentially win back the pawn as well after white plays a move like queen a5, rook a8, queen to c3, and rook takes a2. So instead, Vladimir plays knight g3. I play knight b6, again trying to prevent white from maybe playing c4, also stopping threats towards the pawn on a7. Game continues with knight b3, and now I play pawn takes pawn on e4 here. We get knight takes e4. I play pawn to f5. Now, it's worth noting here that after takes and f5, the reason I did this is even though I'm compromising the pawn structure a little bit, I have this very nasty idea. Say white plays a move like knight to c5, for example. I can now go bishop h5, potentially trapping the rook on d1 and winning it next move. Now, computer, of course, says that after bishop h4, it's very complicated and the game goes on, but Vladimir plays a very sensible move by going knight c3. I played g5 here. I could have played bishop h5, but the reason I did not play this order is because I thought that after bishop h4, bishop takes d1, bishop takes d8. It's very unclear who's better or who's worse. I really had no idea, so I thought that I could invert the order by playing g5 first, and after pawn takes, now going bishop h5, because if white plays bishop h4, there's simply a pawn in the way, and I will take the rook on d1. So he plays bishop to e2 here. We trade the bishops, and now I go queen takes g5, and Vladimir plays this move bishop g3. Already here, I was feeling pretty confident about my position, and I blitzed out this move knight g6 without much thought. However, as soon as Vladimir played knight e to d4, I suddenly realized that the position was extremely complicated. Now, in this position, after a long thought, I chose to play this move rook e8. Initially, I wanted to play queen f6, but after knight b5, I really was unsure what was going on. Computer actually thinks that after a move like e5, knight takes a7, king d7, black is okay, but to us puny humans, a king in the center, unable to castle. White will be able to castle either kingside or queenside in the next couple of moves. It just feels really, really bad, even though the computer thinks that it's relatively fine. So instead I play rook e8, and now that Vladimir plays knight to b5 here, attacking both the pawns on c7 and a7. And now at this point, I have to throw all caution to the wind and play this move pawn to f4, attacking both the bishop on g3 and the knight on b5. Vladimir captures with check on a7. I go king to d8, plays bishop to f2, and now I play this move knight to d7. On first glance, white is up a pawn here. However, this knight is very far out of play on a7. Maybe I can go rook a8 and win this knight eventually because the knight cannot retreat to b5 because the queen covers that square. So I wasn't really sure what was going on here, but it felt like, practically speaking, it should be relatively easy to play. So Vladimir plays rook e1. Now, it's worth noting, of course, because computers have such a good sense of humor, the computer actually thinks that white can play this move rook to a1, and I guess the idea is to play a4, a5, a6, or a4, knight b5. Again, if Vladimir played a move like this, I would probably give him a very, very strange look because it simply makes no sense at all. So he plays rook e1, a logical human move. I go rook to a8, and now he plays this move rook e4. At this point, I was still a little bit concerned about what was going on. I felt that white could maybe castle here to the queen side. And then after a move like c5, knight b5, rook a2, I was really unsure what was going on here. After white plays a move like king b1 or knight c3, I guess computer actually thinks after queen f1, white is significantly better, but don't ask me why. At any rate, Vladimir plays rook e4, which is a very logical human move. I go c5 here, and now he plays rook to a4, trying to prevent me from winning the pawn on a2, and additionally setting up some nice discovery ideas with moves like knight to c6, checking the king. So say I play a move like rook e7, after knight c6 check, I take the knight, and he wins the rook on a8, and with it, he would have won the game. So after rook a4, I play knight b6, Vladimir plays rook a5, and now I go knight to c4. And in this position, of course, the computer thinks that white is completely winning after a random move like pawn to h4, which I don't even understand why, but to illustrate, I guess after queen to d5 here, white can go knight to c6, king d7, and then there's this very insane move, knight to b4. I can't take the knight because I lose my queen. And after I play something like queen f5, there are probably many ways for white to be better, but probably white just trades and takes the pawn on c5 here. And again, very, very hard to see over the board. In fact, frankly, I think borderline impossible, but this did exist. After knight c4, Vladimir plays rook b5. It's worth noting he could have made a draw with rook a4, knight b6, rook a5, but with Vladimir trailing in the standings, he won his first match against, or he lost his first match against Magnus Carlsen yesterday, won his second match. The fact that he's trailing in the standings, he felt like he had to go for it, so he plays this move rook to b5. I take the knight, he takes on c5, and there are all kinds of discoveries here. If I move the rook to say a6, white has bishop b6 check, and after rook takes bishop, white wins the queen on g5, and with it the game. So there are all kinds of discoveries, and also it's worth noting that if I do play bishop takes bishop here, after rook takes c5, let's just say I play a move like knight e5, for example. There are many ways for white to be winning. Queen d4 is one way, but actually queen d4 is the best way, because after king e7, white can go rook c7 check and capture the rook on a7 here. So here I found the only move, which is to play this move king c8, which dodges all the checks on the dark squares from the bishop on c5. So if white plays bishop b6, now the king is no longer in check, and I simply capture the rook. So Vladimir plays rook b4, and now here, fortunately, I have this amazing resource with this thunderbolt move, knight takes d2. Now, on first glance, again, it looks like white is close to winning. If I take the bishop on c5, white can take the knight, and there's a pin, and after b6, knight takes c5. If I play a move like rook c7, knight e4 simply wins the game because it attacks the queen. And if I play queen d5, again, a very neat idea, knight to e4 check, and after I gobble the rook on c4, there's knight d6 with a classic family fork. So I found this move knight takes d2, and now everything starts to spin completely out of control. In this position, Vladimir plays king takes knight. What he probably should have done was taken with the knight, but after bishop c5, rook to c4, b6, b4, for example here, I have this move f3, and after b takes c5, it was my intention to play rook d7 here. And again, I wasn't sure what was going on because white can actually castle, and the game is very, very chaotic, but apparently after knight f4, black is much better. Again, don't ask me to explain why, but this is just one such line of chaos that exists in Fischer Random Chess. So after knight takes d2, Vladimir takes with the king, which is a mistake here because now I go f3 check. White cannot retreat with the bishop to e3 because then you would lose the rook on b4 with check. So he plays queen to e3. And now I play rook d8, and after Vladimir plays rook d4 here, I make a mistake. Now, one thing that's really important to note about this event is that it's a match format. So because it's a match format, you're generally trying to keep in mind where you are in the standings, top to qualify, all these different little nuances, and because of that, I make a mistake in the game. Now, as I said, I felt like I was under a lot of pressure, and this was the moment when all the pressure is kind of gone, and I go for an endgame where I thought maybe I can win, but at the very least, there are no losing chances, and I go for the wrong one. What I should have done here is played rook takes d4 check, and after bishop takes d4, queen takes g2. If white plays king c3 here, for example, I can go rook a6, guarding the pawn on e6, but also I have this very nasty idea of rook c6 check as well, and this is completely winning. And after white plays queen f2, I can now play this move rook to a4. And what we end up with is a much better version of the game where both of the minor pieces on the board, I have the bishop and the knight, versus what we get in the game where I only have knights on the board. So I should have done this, but as I said, I was sort of out of danger. I felt like everything was finally smooth at this point. So why not take the simpler path? So I play queen takes queen. He takes, we trade the bishops, I take, and now I take on g2. Now, as I said, this still looks kind of scary because his pawn is very advanced here on g2, but there are only rooks and knights on the board, so with perfect play, this should be a draw, and Vladimir finds some very good moves. He starts with king e3, and now I play rook takes a2. Initially, what I wanted to do was I really wanted to play rook a5, but after knight d3, rook f5, rook g1, knight h4, when white plays knight f4 here, white should be able to save the game and draw, because on rook g5, white just goes king f2, and otherwise white will be able to capture the pawn on g2. So at this point, I really wanted to play rook a5, but after using a couple of minutes, I played the fairly safe option with rook takes a2, but now after king f2, I have to play knight f4 here, and after knight to f4 is played, knight d3, the game really just peters out into a draw. There isn't really much more to go over, but I'll explain it anyway. We reach this endgame where basically both sides have 3 pawns. My rook is more active because it can swing to the h-file. It also puts pressure on b2 and potentially can go to b3 where it attacks both of the pawns. But Vladimir finds rook g1, which more or less ends the game because now white's rook becomes very active and he can sacrifice the b pawn for the h pawn. So I play h5, he goes rook g2, king d6, he goes king f4 here, and now I play rook to b4 check. Perhaps I could have played a move like e5 instead, but after e5, king e3, rook to b4 here, white can play a move like h3, and I don't really have a good way to progress. I can go king d5, but again, white just waits on the second rank, and whenever I go to h4, he just goes rook f3, so it doesn't change much. Instead, I play rook b4, king g5, h4, and now after rook to g4 here, there really is not much more that needs to be said. We trade the pawns. I try to push my b pawn up the board, but his h pawn is also extremely fast, and inevitably it creates enough counterplay to where I can't win the game. So the rest of the moves are pretty straightforward. Also worth noting, white cannot grab the pawn on b4 here because then rook d8 would be checkmate. So he goes king f8, I take, he takes back, I go king g5, plays d4, king f6, king e8, and now I play rook a7, hoping for a little bit of a trick. I could have played rook d5, but white will always just wait on this 4th rank, and if I ever try to come close with the king, white's king then becomes active and keeps an eye on the pawn on e6. So I play rook a7 here, and I was really hoping for one last little trick here, which is that Vladimir would play rook b5, because now after rook a4, d5, I thought that I could take and go king e6 here. I guess actually this is still a draw because white can just go rook d1, and if I go rook e8, there's rook d8. But the line that I was hoping for was maybe he would play rook d8 to stop the checkmate. But then after rook to h4, white can only play king f8 to prevent checkmate. I go check and gobble the rook and win the game. But Vladimir instead plays rook b6, so now if I go rook a4, there's just d5, winning the pawn on e6. So I play king f5, and inevitably we play a couple more moves. Trade, I go e5, and he takes. He could have played d5, but after d5, e4, d6, e3, both sides end up getting queens, and this too would have led to a draw. So we drew the second game of the first mini match. This means that I gain one more match point. I keep my 2-point lead over him in the race for either first or second place. So this is the first game that I wanted to go over, and now we're going to go to the second game of the second mini match. So in the first game of the second mini match, we drew another game where I was in a little bit of trouble, perhaps more than a little, but I was able to salvage it. So we'll jump to the second one. So in this one, I start by playing f4, playing the Burr's defense. Now, it's interesting to note that there are many moves that are playable. c4, b4, a4 are probably the 3 best moves, but I decided I wanted something different with f4. My idea was very simple. I thought that I could play something like a Burr's defense with b3 and e3. So just to illustrate it, something like this with bishop f3, and it feels very much like you're getting a bird structure with trade, nice bishop, maybe knight e5. You have 3 pawns and 3 pawns from d2 to f4, as well as diagonal from a1 to g7. So I thought this felt kind of right. I thought it was inspired and different, but to the credit of my opponent, Vladimir Fedosov, he found this very nice, very unhuman looking move, bishop to a5, which I completely overlooked. And now I have a little bit of a problem. If I play a move like d3, for example, black can play this very, very nasty move, bishop d2, threatening very simply to go bishop e3 check, winning a bunch of material. I cannot move my rook because then I would lose the knight on e1. After bishop d2, I think the game is actually simply over, so I can't play that. Additionally, if I play knight to f3, for example here, black can now grab this pawn on f4. And if I play this move, bishop c3, after takes, b6, white maybe is still relatively okay, but with the double pawns, it feels kind of bad to play like this. So instead, I play this move c3, hoping that eventually I can either play something like b4 or c4. Vladimir plays b5 here, and now I play b4. Now, already by this point, I felt that I was sort of drifting in the game. I didn't feel like I was really there per se. I just felt a little tired. So I was kind of making these moves very quickly, and unfortunately, they were not good moves. So Vladimir plays bishop b6. I take on c5. He takes back with the bishop. Now I go e3, and already you can tell that with this pawn structure, it's really not all that special, and black has a significant advantage. So Vladimir plays knight d6, and the biggest issue I have here, frankly, is that I have this bishop on a1 that's very passive with this pawn on c3 in the way. So after knight d6, I play knight b3 here. Vladimir drops the bishop back to b6, and now I play this move knight f3. Now in this position, I really wanted to play bishop f3 here, but the problem with playing bishop f3 was quite simply, I thought black can play knight f6. There are ideas like knight c4 and knight e4, and again, with this bishop on a1 and this great bishop on b6, it really doesn't feel good, and the computer pretty much confirms the evaluation. So instead I play knight f3 here. Now this move, by the way, was based on just a pure miscalculation, because after knight c4, my initial idea was to go rook e1 so I could castle. So say white plays knight d6 or black plays knight d6, I can simply castle here. And I thought in this position, at least it shouldn't be that bad. Problem is, if I do play rook e1 here, black can take the pawn at f4 because of the pin. So instead I play knight fd4 here, trying to attack the pawn on b5, maybe trade some bishops with bishop f3 as well. And now Vladimir plays knight d6 to guard the pawn on b5, and I go bishop f3. Here he plays a5, another excellent move, because if I play just say a random waiting move like h4, black can play a4 attacking the knight, and after knight to c1, knight takes d2, disaster will strike. So after a5, I play queen e1, and the reason I played queen e1 here is quite simple. This bishop is very bad on a1 with the pawn on c3. Additionally, this knight on c4 is very well placed, so I want to kick the pony out of town with d3, and the only way to do that is by guarding the e-pawn, because if I play d3, I hang the pawn on e3. So I play queen to e1, and now he goes a4, and I play knight to c1, of course, and now Vladimir makes a mistake. He plays this move pawn to e5. Now, this isn't really the end of the world. In fact, it's very much the human move here, because you feel like white is going to go d3, and where can your knight go? What the computer actually likes, besides the insane move h5, is something like rook c8. But after d3, for example, knight to a5, it feels like after bishop e2, maybe the bishop is coming into the game via a3, and maybe there are some chances. So Vladimir plays e5, which is a very thematic move, makes a lot of sense, because I have to take, he takes back with the knight. But the problem with this line is that now after I trade the bishop on a8, I can gambit a pawn here with c4 and open up the scope for the bishop on a1 for the very long diagonal towards the pawn on g7 and the rook on h8. So after c4, Vladimir takes with the pawn, and now I go knight to f5. Now I still felt like I was a little bit worse here, but the main point behind this is that now, even though I'm down a pawn, all of my moves become very easy to play, and it's a very natural position. So Vladimir trades, he plays d6, and now of course I castle here, and Vladimir plays f6. Now, a funny move that Vladimir could have played was to play this move rook d8. And you initially think, well, wait, but white just takes, and it's game over. You have the rook stuck in the corner. But because the king is already on g8 and it's not the king is not traveling through a checking square, black can actually just castle here, and the position is completely balanced. So Vladimir plays f6 instead. I go queen g3. The idea is to take the pawn on f6 to use the pin on the g file to my advantage. Plays queen d5, attacking the pawn on d2. I go bishop c3, putting the bishop on the anchoring square where I guard the pawn on d2. And now the bishop is perfectly placed, and the only piece I need to develop really is my knight on c1. And black still has some issues with the rooks on the king side. So Vladimir plays h5 here. Now, initially I thought this was a bad move, but as the game went on, I realized this is quite a strong move, because black does not need to castle the king. If you wanted to laugh a little bit, you could castle to the queen side. Not that this is a good move, but just that it exists. Additionally, you could maybe try to play queen e6, and then say I play a move like a3, rook f7, just to illustrate, and castle like this. But again, it takes time, and Vladimir, to his credit, realizes that here he can play h5 and activate his rook via h6 instead. So after h5, I play knight e2. I cannot play rook takes f6 because after rook takes, black has the nasty move pawn to h4. And if I move the queen off the g file, he just eats the rook. And then the only square that's available where the queen doesn't get captured by the knight would be g5. But then I walk into a classic discovered check with knight f3, and I very simply resign the game. So instead I play knight e2, Vladimir plays rook h6, and now I play knight to f4. Now, the funny thing is that I use a lot of time here to play knight f4, and I actually overlooked something. When I went knight f4, I completely missed that there's this in-between discovered check with knight f3, and after queen takes, there's queen b5. Computer, oddly enough, doesn't think it's that bad after queen c6, bishop c5, queen takes a4, but I did miss it for anybody who's wondering. Vladimir, however, almost instantly plays queen f7. Now I played h4. The idea very simple, that I'm going to prevent black from taking space, and I'm always going to try to play against this weak pawn on h5. So now he plays bishop to c7 here. I go pawn to e4, and the idea is simply that I want to create this great outpost on d5 for my knight. Vladimir goes bishop d8. And now I make a mistake. I play king h1. Now, what I should have done after the game, thinking about it, is I probably should have put the king on h2. But the reason I didn't do it was obviously I saw that there's a check with knight g4, and it just feels wrong to walk into a check potentially on the square. So I play king h1, he goes queen e8, and now I made a mistake. I decided to take the knight on e5. Now, the reason I did this was based simply on a pure miscalculation. After pawn takes, or it's worth noting, if black takes with the f-pawn, this loses to knight takes h5, so I'm threatening mate on g7 with the knight and the queen. And if black takes the knight, I simply trade everything on f8, and then I play queen f3 to win the rook on h5. So here he takes with a d-pawn, I go knight d5. He plays rook g6, and now after a long think, I play this move queen e3. Initially, I thought I could go queen f3, but to my horror, I realized that after rook g4, g3, black can actually play g6 here, and now after takes, and rook takes g3, I did not actually see how I was supposed to play here. If I play a move like rook b1 to try and infiltrate, black can go queen c8 here, covering the b8 square, but also threatening mate in 1 with queen h3. And apparently computer thinks that after rook g1, maybe I can draw, but there's no reason to want to go into this. So after a long think, I play this move queen e3. He goes rook g4, I play g3, and now Vladimir plays a strange move. He plays this move queen e6. Now, this move in and of itself is not necessarily a blunder per se, but the thing is that now it hangs this pawn on h5, which I did take. Game continues with g6, I go rook h6, and now Vladimir shocked me when he played this move f5. Now, this was move number 32. We had just reached time control, so both of us got an additional 5 minutes, but this is where I made a big mistake. Initially, when I was calculating rook h5 with limited time, I saw king g7 and h5, and I figured if black goes g5, I go rook g6, and at least my rook is guarded and it's safe, and if black takes, I just take, of course, and anything else I can always just play like rook g6, something like this, and I should be okay. So I was really expecting king g7, and then Vladimir played f5. Now, I had seen this very briefly during the game when I had this limited time right around move 30, and initially I was going to play queen a7 right away. Problem is, as soon as I was about to play it, I suddenly realized there was another tantalizing possibility with this move queen to c5, because now if black plays rook g3, I can go rook h8 check, king takes rook, king h7, and queen takes d8, and now white is winning. So when I saw this possibility, I used about 2.5 of my 5 minutes left before playing queen a7. Now there was a second hitch as well. Besides just seeing queen c5, the initial line that I wanted to play was queen to b8 here. But after rook d7, the line that I saw was rook f5, but rook takes d5. And now if I take on d5, black can simply take the pawn with check, and then I guess king h2 is the only move, and black can take the rook. The queen guards the bishop, and black, or actually, maybe it's still tricky. I thought black could take. Apparently I have rook d6, which is winning, classic right triangle, but this is all very, very complicated. So after intending to do this, I instead realized that I could play queen a8 here with the same idea that after rook d7, rook takes f5. If black takes now on d5, I take with the pawn, and the queen guards on d5. Again, another classic right triangle. And after queen f5, queen d8, king g7, it's simply a checkmate. And if black goes king f7, it's checkmate on h7. And if black plays queen f8, just check, and I win the queen. So I felt really, really good about myself. And then Vladimir shocked me with this move c3. What I had seen was that after king g7, there's only one move that's winning, but I can go rook f5 to stack the rooks. Black cannot capture the rooks. I win the queen on e6. And now let's just say black plays rook e4. There's a forced checkmate with rook h7. king g8, check, king f7, and rook h7, because the knight covers the f6 square, and that would be all she wrote. So I saw this idea with king g7, but for some reason when he played the c3 move, it completely threw me off, and I just lost focus, and it was very hard because at this point rook to h5 is the winning line here, but because it wasn't the obvious move, and the move that I of course saw was knight f6 check, I wasn't able to find it. If I had played rook h5 after pawn takes, rook takes, pawn takes d2, let's just say, oh, there's actually even just queen a4, which I didn't even think about, which just wins on the spot. This would have been game over. But the problem is that in this position, the move that preoccupied me the most was knight to f6, and after takes with the queen, rook takes f6, c takes d2, rook f1, black queens, takes. King h2 is winning here, but I was a little bit worried because king g2 is the move I saw, and after rook d3, I thought black is going to win the pawn on g3. There's also king g7 to trap the rook on h6, and I really was unsure. So when I wasn't 100% sure there, I thought, well, wait a second, but why can't I just take the pawn on c3? What changed? Nothing changed. So I ended up taking the pawn, and now Vladimir takes on d5. I take back, and he finds queen b6. Now, at this point, with only about 1 minute, I think I had about 1 minute left on the clock. I used about 30 seconds, I believe, before playing the move that draws the game. Now, initially, I thought maybe king g2 was a move, but I just figured that after rook g3, king g3, queen g1, there probably was a repetition. Sadly, the king can actually run here, and I would have won the game, because after king e3, queen e1, king d3, queen d1, king c4, queen e2, king c5, queen e3, I do not play king d6 or king c6, because this would actually lead to a forced checkmate. But instead I go king to b4, I think is safest, and after queen b6, king takes a4. There are no checks, the c6 square is covered, all the squares on the a file are covered, and this would have been game over. But with limited time on my clock, I decided to play the move rook g5 instead, simply because I knew that I couldn't lose here, and I felt that if I draw the game and I don't lose the match, I keep myself in the running to potentially win the group, but definitely more importantly to remain in the top two. So I played rook g5, and after playing it, I offered a draw because black has nothing better to do than to trade the rooks and go queen b1, king h2, queen c2 check, king h3, queen f5, and now after king g2, queen c2, let's say I run the king closer, black can always just check, and inevitably this is a repetition. So two very, very exciting games. Both of the two mini matches were very, very close, very, very hotly contested. I ended up drawing all 4 games and drawing both of the mini matches. That leaves me tied after day 2 here in the Fischer Random with six match points, tied for the lead with Magnus Carlsen, Fedosiev on 4, Bluebaum on 0. So if things go well tomorrow, I should be able to finish in the top 2 and advance to semifinals. But there's still some business to take care of. At any rate, I hope you guys enjoyed this recap, and I'll be back with another recap from day 3 of the Fischer Random World Chess Championship here in Reykjavik, Iceland tomorrow. Thank you so much, you guys. See you soon. Bye.